Stephen, thank you very much indeed. What a great opening presentation to this session on policy, which is what we're talking about today. Now, one of the things I'd like to pick up with you, if I can, Stephen, starting off, is this issue of data, because Arthur Hanna, in his comments before we started the session, talked about the challenge of transparency and owning of data and the big challenges of accessing data. So you mentioned the need for independent verification of emissions. How can that really be achieved?
Well, thank you, David. Indeed, that goes right to the heart of the matter. And really, we're talking about two separate but each important elements. The first is settling on an agreed MRV, measurement, reporting, and verification protocol. And as I mentioned in the paper, there are a number of those that one can pick from. But the question really there is how much of the value chain is the seller responsible for? For example, does the seller's commitment extend upstream if the seller doesn't own the upstream? Does the seller's commitment extend downstream if they're selling FOB or their tolling system? Are they responsible? Should they be responsible for the carbon that's produced in transporting the LNG cargo and then the downstream use of that cargo? Does it depend on how efficient or inefficient the downstream customer may be in their use of that cargo? So that's the first piece of it. The second piece of it is the verification you mentioned, which is that, okay, we agree that it's this amount of carbon, and we say we're going to reduce that or offset that by planting trees or by reducing upstream methane emissions or whatever it may be. Is that just our word that you have to take for that, or do we have a third party that is going to verify that using some international standards? And it's a bit of the Wild West out there at the moment. I have to say, there's many ways of doing this as there are flavors of ice cream. And I agree with the comment that the data is going to be critical. If we don't have transparency and integrity in the data, then the whole system just becomes like Jell-O.
Now, you and I, Stephen, have been around a while. We've been in this industry a while, and I remember the good old days where you had one field selling to an LNG plant and out it went to the customer. So we could nicely measure the emissions from that field. But of course, in the States, where you are on the kind of east coast of the States, how the hell do you know where the gas is coming from? So how can you actually quantify the upstream element when literally you're buying potentially the gas from the market? Is that possible?
So it's a fantastic point. And for many of the producers, they really can't go beyond their fence line. And so it's very difficult, but they can contractually commit with certain upstream producers to purchase gas at a certain level of emissions or with certain covenants or undertakings with respect to flaring or methane emissions or total CO2 reduction. So contractually it can be addressed. That raises some difficult questions, some of which were talked about in the presentation, about, okay, what happens when those commitments go sideways? What's the impact of that? But in other cases, even where you do adopt one MRV protocol and you have even a third-party verifier, you're exactly right, David. Often they will deem certain levels of carbon emissions from certain activities because it's just too difficult to measure specifically.
Well, look, we've got a question come in. Has the carbon neutral concept been applied to other energy products like crude oil and coal? If not, why? Have you got any views on that?
I'm not aware of either of those two being particularly focused yet on carbon neutrality. And I think that there's much more opportunity for us in the natural gas industry. We already have a good story, right? We already have a story where our industry is bringing value to the world, both in terms of energy and relieving energy poverty, but also in terms of substituting for other more carbon intensive fuels in the energy mix and thereby helping the world meet climate goals. ESG is an opportunity, carbon neutrality, carbon offsets, carbon reduction. These are all opportunities as well as challenges for our industry to take it a step further and really prove our bona fides.
Well, in the last literally seconds, I want to pick up this concept, the cost of the cost of the credits. You mentioned 2 to 3 cents on the futures market, 60 cents is what Gignal's saying. How do you reconcile these two? And literally, you've got to give me a quickie there, Stephen.
Yeah, really, it is, as the Wild Wild West, is a little bit of everything out there. And so you can buy some credits for 2 cents. You can, Gignal says that offsets are worth 60 cents. Some companies aren't doing verification, so you don't really know what it's costing them at all. Others are being very transparent about it. So I think it's not yet a mature market, the best we can say. And the last thing I'll end with is there's a webinar next week on this topic where we will explore it further through Rice University, the Baker Institute, and Baker Bots. If anybody's interested in hearing more about it, just send me an email, stephen.miles@bakerbots.com, and then I'll send you an invitation to the webinar.
Great promo, and I think we're going to remember the Wild West as being the key line from that presentation. Thank you, Stephen, very much indeed.